All right, let's do one more text effect. This one's going to be a little bit more in depth. We're going to create some movement and we're going to explore motion blur and what that means for your videos and your video editing moving forward. So this is a pretty cool one. I like this one. So of course we can just use a blank project to get going. There we go. And we're just going to keep it simple for now. So we're just going to add some text. And you can draw your text box. You might as well just kind of almost fill up the full screen. Don't really need any room for anything else. And what should our text be? I don't know. You can make whatever you want. It's kind of gonna be spacey. It's kind of spacey vibes. So I don't know. I'll just call it like galactic or something. So let's highlight the text. Let's center it both vertically and horizontally. Let's get some new fonts. Nice thick fonts. So I think you guys would have this on your Impact. If not, just try to find someone that looks pretty similar. Fun fact, Impact is the Call of Duty font, if you didn't know. And let's make this text bigger. I don't actually want to use the old fit to size. I don't want it to be that big. So let's just go into here. And let's see what we can do here. Maybe 144 looks pretty good. And the last thing we're going to do with our text here, we did this in Photoshop right at the start, is we're going to increase the space in between letters. So this option right here lets you do that. So let's just, let's not get crazy. 50. Cool. So this is the general. We've got some text here. Looking pretty good. And we're going to apply many effects to this text. Hold on to your horses.
Opacity 0. Outline 100%.
Actually, let's do what we did last video. Let's text color. Let's turn that opacity down so we can't see it. And the contour or the outline, let's crank that up. So turn the opacity of your contour up to 100. And we'll give our text a nice outline. So what did we do last video? I think we just did 10, right? Let's do 10 again. Looked pretty good. And make sure you turn that contour color to white so that we can see it nicely. White, white, white. All right, just like last video, I want to do some magic to this text. So I'm going to double click the text object in my timeline. And I'll be taken to a new timeline where I can add all the stuff I want to kind of play around with the text and make it look good, keeping it separate from the main timeline. So you've got these two tabs open now. So let's go to the empty one. Let's go to the text one. So we've added text and we've got all this other stuff we can add, and they're pretty much just shapes. So for example, you could add a rectangle by clicking this button. So if you click that, just press OK. And you can just choose this. I don't want an outline for my rectangle. I just want a straight plain rectangle. So I'm going to choose that option there. And I'm just going to draw over my text. So what can we do with this rectangle? Well, we can give it some color because by default it's white. So in your trusty properties window, let's not just give it a color, let's give it a gradient. We talked about gradients briefly in Photoshop. So the brush, we're not going to choose a solid color. We're going to make a gradient. And remember, gradient is just colors kind of bleeding into one another. You know, you start with one color and you blend into the second color. Scroll down a bit and you should see gradient settings right here, this little blue box. So you can click it, and we're going to change the mode to reflected. And we're not going to make a 2-color gradient, we're going to make a 3-color gradient. So if you double click right outside there, you can add a third little tick right here. So I can choose my first color. So if you click this box, actually you can just leave this one at white if it is. Then click the middle box and choose a light color of your choice. I like green, so I'm going to go with green. And then for this final color, which should be black, you can change that to a darker color of this middle color. So I chose a nice bright green in the middle. So for my final color, I'm going to choose a nice dark green. So you should have white, some nice bright color, and then a dark version of that same color. 3 colors. Go ahead and press OK. Now you've got this nice, colorful little gradient, rectangle. So I don't want this rectangle, what's the purpose of this rectangle? Well, watch this. In your timeline, we haven't worked with these blend modes yet. We did a bit in Photoshop. So if you click this little drop down arrow, instead of having the default blend, you can choose source in. And what source in does, you can kind of see from the icon there. What source in does is if you have this rectangle is going to fill in only where the text is. So that's kind of hard to explain, but it's kind of like masking in Photoshop. So basically that rectangle is only showing up where it overlaps with the text. So anywhere there's text, that rectangle is showing. And basically what we've done is we've kind of created the illusion that the text has this color, but really it's a rectangle that's only showing up where the text is. And the last thing we can do with this gradient is you've got this diagonal line bisecting your rectangle here. You can take that corner line of your gradient and you can put it in the middle. And now the gradient starts in the middle and it spans out from the middle. So it spans out to the right and it spans out to the left. Instead of starting from the left and going all the way to the right, it starts in the middle and then it spits out both sides. Very minor detail, but cool to know that's kind of just how the gradient works. All right, now we're actually done with the text, so that's cool there. So what we can do is we have the rectangle layer still selected, so just click off it. So just click somewhere in the timeline and make sure you don't see that big dotted rectangle selected around there. So with your rectangle not selected, we can go ahead and we can add a video effect. So we're not going to do the nature route this time. We're going to do filters and add some motion blur. So if your needle is at the start of your timeline, just press OK. And now we've added a motion blur effect here. So what is motion blur? Well, we've got all these properties to work with. Let's just change the motion type to zoom. So we're going to zoom into this text object. And while we're zooming in, we're blurring, because that's what motion is. You see it a lot in video games. When there's a lot of motion, things get blurred. It kind of tries to mimic, real life. When things go fast, your eyes can't really focus on them if they're out of your point of view. Anyways, so change it to zoom and then blur distances. We know how to do this from last video. Let's change the constant parameter into a linear parameter. And we're going to say at the start of the effect, we're going to leave it 0, so we're going to have no blur. And then by the end of the effect, we're going to have a 50 pixel blur. So what does this look like? Well, you can go to your timeline, you can press play. Now I think by default, you guys probably have this at 720. So if your computer is running it fine, like it's not stuttering, just leave it at 720. And you can see as the clip goes on, we get a slight zoom into the text. The zoom is getting slightly bigger and it's getting more and more blurry as it goes on. And if you're having some stuttering with your computer, try turning this quality, this playback quality, to like 360 or something. It might make it run smoother for you. I'm doing okay, so I'm going to leave it at 720. It should look something like that. Now, motion blur works when is a really cool effect when there's a lot of motion. We don't really have much motion going on here, so let's maybe try to create some more motion. So let's go back to our main timeline. You should just have one text object. That's the one we've been working on so far. So click on your text object and then Control-C to copy and Control-V to paste it. So now you should have two text layers. Just slide this one to the front of your timeline so it matches up with the original text layer. And what can we do now? Well, if you double click this new text layer, so it should be called text 2, we have the same effects. We have our rectangle and we have our motion blur effect. However, for this motion blur effect, let's go into our properties and let's change the blur distance. Instead of it going from 0 to 50, let's go from 0 to 100. Like that. So what does this do for us? Well, let's go back to the main timeline and let's see how this looks. So if you can't tell, we've got another thing that's being motion blurred, and it's being blurred at a greater rate than the original one was. So we're creating more motion blur. So let's keep making some more motion blurs. So let's copy this second layer. So Control-C, Control-V, paste it in. And yours will probably be text 3 minus text 4. That's okay. So for this new one, let's go inside the effects for this text object. Let's click the motion blur effect. Let's scroll down and let's go from 0 to 200. Just like that. Back to the main timeline. So now we have 3 text objects being blurred at different rates. And we can see kind of the motion blur effect kind of taken full, but there's still really not too much motion going on. So on our main timeline, we've got these 3 text objects. If you click and drag, you can highlight all 3 of them, or you can hold shift and click all 3. And then right click and we're going to convert to sprite. Just like that. And this sprite object basically just takes all of those layers and just puts them in as a single layer. It's probably the best way to think of it from a Photoshop point of view. And in our sprite here, our sprite object has all these properties. And we don't really need to change much. You can change the uses container to no. Show effects. Yes. All right, so we've got this sprite containing a bunch of text objects. So if you double click the sprite object, you can see all these text objects, and all of these text objects have their motion blur effects and their rectangles. So there's a lot of overlapping pieces here. A lot of it's good. It's good that's we've kept organized to this point. However, now that I'm in my sprite timeline, I've got these 3 text objects, but I'm going to add another video effect. So make sure your needle's at the start of your timeline. Click video effects. This time we're going to add a filter, and we're going to add, oh, not a filter, a transform, and we're going to add a crop. Press OK. And crop, we worked with crops in Photoshop briefly. Crops basically let you choose usually, most likely, a small portion of your thing to show. So if you had an image, you could crop out, the fluff around the main object that you want to show in your image, or in this case, a video. Maybe it's best to explain by just doing. So with the crop effect selected in the properties window, go ahead and click the crop tools button. Now, I don't know which window is going to pop up for you, but for me, I have the key editor, and I can move this window just to give me some more space. I don't know where it's going to show up for you. Sometimes it's different for everyone. So this is another timeline. I know, lots of timelines. You can see as I move this needle moves as well. So this is just a timeline that basically is mirroring our original timeline, except it lets me do some cool things here. So what do I want to do? Well, let's take a look at this left property, which deals with our x-coordinates. So right now it's set to constant, as all of our properties are. Let's change it to linear. Now your needle should be all the way at the start. So at the start of your video, at the start of this effect, you haven't cropped anything. You're seeing exactly what you've been seeing this whole time. However, by the end of the effect, by the end of the sprite, I want to zoom in. So on this little video preview here, you can choose what you want to crop to. So I'm going to make this rectangle nice and small. And I'm going to put it over the A and the C, or just whatever 2 letters you used for yours. So what did I do? Well, you can see now if you move your timeline piece by piece, you start by seeing all of your text. And then that box gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And basically what it's doing is it's zooming in. You can imagine this dotted line as like your TV screen. So this is what's going to show up on your TV screen or your computer screen. So that at the end of the effect, the only thing you're going to see on your monitor is these 2 letters. It's going to zoom in on those 2 letters. So let's go ahead and apply the effect like that. And now you can see on our main timeline, you can go back to your original. You can see we are cropping and we're zooming into basically the selection that we chose. So your computer might have some issues rendering that. So you might want to make sure that you've got your quality turned down just a little bit so you get a nice smoother preview. So I'm kind of done with all this stuff on the right, so I'm just going to squish it back there. You can close your key editor if you'd like. You don't really need that. It'll pop back open whenever you do. All right, the last thing I want to do is this effect is just a bit too long. So right now it takes about 10 seconds to zoom in. Let's cut that down to half. So I'm going to drag it to my timeline to about the 5-second mark, just so we get a little bit of a faster effect. Heck, we could probably bring it down to 4 seconds if we wanted to. But now our effect looks a bit off because you have to double click your sprite and you have to make sure that these text effects, these with their motion blur and their rectangles, you got to trim those down to the same distance as your crop effect. So now, once we're good there, all the effects are affecting at the right time. And there you have it. So a good exercise, and once again, working with effects and going into the timeline. Now you know what motion blur is, and you've been reminded about cropping. So all that's left for you to do is to find a nice video on Pexels and put it in the background. Probably something of like stars or something like spacey, spaceship, Star Wars, something like that. And then also add some audio. So you know how to add audio from the last video. However, you're responsible for finding your own audio. So on Canvas, there is a link to a website called Sound Dogs, and you can search for sound effects here. So you could search for something, I don't know, something spacey. And it's going to bring you to all of these different sound effects, and you can press play on them here to see what they sound like. And once you find a sound effect you like, just press this little I button and download the MP3 preview. And then just throw that file into your VSDC one. And then let me know when you're done, because I want to take a look at it instead of you handing it into Canvas, because it's just easier that way. So there you go. Hopefully that wasn't too bad.